And the other, and it's just beat me to it. The other thing to say is that we will be recording just I think this bit and Craig's input. We're not recording the workshop, so if anybody's got any issues with that, then obviously turn your screen and your sound off if that causes you an issue. The other thing I've been asked to remind people about is we're still offering free membership for the Scottish Community Development Network. Now, I noticed on the spreadsheet of everybody that's participating, although there's only about 40 odd turned up so far, with 75 registered and about 30 odd people aren't members. So if I could encourage those that are not members to take out membership, you can do it just by visiting the website. There's an easy wee link on there, fill in the form, 2 minutes, job's done. We would really appreciate that if you could. Now, it's good to see a lot of kind of faces that I recognise from the past, and it's even better to see some of the faces that I don't recognise. So we might get a chance to have a chat to you guys over the course of today. My name's Gordon Terrace, and I'm the current chair of Scottish Community Development Network, for those that don't know me. As a member-led organisation, as a member-led network, our main aim, our kind of mission, if you like, is, and I'm going to read this out, this is from our kind of strategy document, but it's how we've been organised for years. Our aim is to be a strong, dynamic organisation which provides a forum for community development practitioners, both paid and unpaid, to share experiences, exchange information, discuss and debate practice and policy issues within a framework which seeks to empower communities. So with that in mind, the title or the theme for the conference today is Community Development, Grassroots Activism at the Heart of Democracy. So today what we're going to be doing, hopefully with your assistance, we'll be exploring what we as practitioners can do to ensure that grassroots action is at the heart of democracy. We're also going to be looking at how can we support marginalised communities to ensure that they're not left behind. And how do we develop the case for investment in communities and investment in skilled intervention of community development to support them to meaningfully engage in that process. Our keynote speaker for today is Craig Dalzell. You will be able to see him. He'll be going live shortly. There he's waving. Craig is Head of Policy and Research at Common Weal, Scotland. I'm sure some of you will have read some of his articles and heard him speak before. He's been a friend of SCDN over the years. This is not his first rodeo with us. And I know that his input will be both kind of thought-provoking and insightful. So, and that will then lead us in to our workshops. We'll then come back together, wee bit of feedback from the workshops, and then at the end of the programme, we've added in something we've not really done before. I suppose we've not really done hellish many of these virtual conferences before, but we've added in a wee thing called Blether with the Board. Now, in way of explanation, you don't have to come, right? It'd be lovely if you would hang about and bring your sandwich in. I think what we were thinking was, at conferences that we've done in the past, often a lot of the really good discussion and debate and getting to know folk is over the tea break and over the lunch break and also at the kind of wee intervals that you have. So what we're trying to do is just do a bit of that. So we'll have about 3 or 4 chat rooms at the end. Folk just join it. You can flit in between them, I think. I'm looking at Meredith here. And then just a bit of a catch up with folk, and also maybe a wee bit of reflection on how the conference is going, and maybe make some demands of us as a board for SCDN. So we're nearly ready to get things going, but what I'm going to do first of all is hand over to Meredith Greta. Meredith, another friend of SCDN. She's from the International Association for Community Development, and she's helping us out with a lot of things today, but especially the tech. So what I'm going to ask Meredith to do is just take us through a wee bit of the tech that we'll be using during the course of today. And then we'll go on to a wee explanation about the workshop from Fiona, and then Craig can do his input. So Meredith, over to you.
Thanks, Gordon. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. So yeah, we're just going to be using a Jamboard today. That's really the only kind of technological aspect of today. And then you'll be in breakout rooms, and I'll kind of explain how that works too. So if you've never used a Jamboard before, I'm going to share my screen and just show you how it works. And then I'll share the link with you so that you can also use the Jamboard. Did everybody see this okay? All right, so we've got some icebreaker questions, and this is just to kind of get everybody used to using the Jamboard. So you'll see over here on this left-hand side, there's a panel of icons. And what you're going to do is you'll add in your answers to these questions. So where do you live in Scotland? I've put in my answer is Glasgow. What do you want for Christmas? I put that into. Do you have any New Year's resolutions? So let's say I want to answer this one. So I'm going to go over here to where all the icons are. And the fourth one down, if you hover over it, it says sticky note. So that's what we're going to use. So you'll click that, it'll pop up. And because the question that I'm answering is on a pink background, I'm going to change my background to pink too, just so it's easy to identify which question I'm answering. So I do not have any New Year's resolutions, so I'm just putting no. Then you can hit save, and it'll automatically pop up with another sticky note. If you don't want to add anything else or answer any other questions, you can just hit cancel, or you can click outside of the sticky note box. And then you can move this just under that question. You can resize it. It doesn't need to be so aggressively huge. You can make it a bit smaller and then just pop it under there. We've got a second page. It's exactly the same questions, but it's just if we run out of space here, people can just pop over to the next page by clicking these arrow icons at the top here. And then you'll see it later. Fiona's going to introduce this. We're going to use this same Jamboard for the breakout rooms. So you'll be put in a breakout room, and there's going to be 6 different ones. We'll tell you who your facilitator is, and then you're going to have to answer these questions here. So you'll see breakout room 1, question 1, and then you click to the next one. Still the same breakout room, but question 2 and question 3. And then if we just keep going, you'll see, okay, that's the second breakout room. So we'll talk about that more a little bit later when it comes time to that. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to give you all the link to the Jamboard. I'm going to pop this in the chat here. So you can go ahead and click on that link, and then you'll see the Jamboard yourself. I can see some people have clicked it. That's awesome. So you can just add your answers there. If you have any questions at all during this time, just unmute yourself and ask, because this is just kind of a time to get used to using the Jamboard. Just kind of get familiar with it. Nice. Looks like people are answering questions. And you might find that you'll have to move your sticky note around because it pops all the sticky notes kind of in the same place. So you just have to drag them around. Yeah. All right. People are doing it. That's great. Oh, the answers are flying in. Oh my goodness. And you can move on to the next page. If this page is getting a little bit hectic, you can just click on to the next one and add your answers there.
Green one.
Oh, somebody else also wants a stand mixer. That's what I want for Christmas too. Oh, someone's just messaged me to say that the link is saying too many people are using it at the moment. So sometimes we've got 40 people. Sometimes they'll put a limit on it, 30 people. But when we do this in the breakout rooms, there's just going to be maybe 1 or 2 people per breakout room kind of taking notes here. So it shouldn't be an issue there. But if you have kind of put your answers here and you feel comfortable using it, you can just close that link. And don't worry about losing the link, because I'm going to pop it into the chat every once in a while. And when you are put into breakout rooms, I'll give you the link again. But it looks like everyone's feeling pretty confident on this. The color coordination is working. So does anyone have any questions at all? I think everyone is just a pro at this kind of tech now on Zoom. Everyone's gotten used to it. I think if no one has any questions, I'm just going to hand it over to Fiona, and she's going to give us a bit of an introduction to the workshop. Oh, Fiona, you're still on mute. Okay.
Okay, right. Silly me, the very basics of technology. Okay, so within the workshops, just in terms of the use of the Jamboards and chat, we would encourage everyone to use the Jamboard. And if they don't feel comfortable using it themselves, then, you know, obviously raise the point within a discussion group. So that's the kind of first point. So what we're hoping to do is to kind of create a wee space where folk can reimagine, rather than, because we know that it's been absolutely hugely challenging before and indeed during all this COVID in terms of community development, the way in which, you know, our agenda's been stolen, our language has been stolen, we've been sliced, diced, cut into bits, depoliticized, etc. We're so aware of that, and we've discussed it, you know, for many, many years. So it's to try and encourage, you know, everyone in the discussion group just to think, what could we do? You know, here's a big opportunity here, democracy. It's at the very, it's at the very heart of how society organises itself. So it's like trying to sort of step out of how it is now and imagine, vision, you know, what potentially we as community development practitioners could do in order to ensure that grassroots activism is at the heart of local democracy. Because I'm sure we've all got experience of the Community Empowerment Act and how many of the disadvantaged communities, the disenfranchised communities, have actually managed to take advantage of this. So many systems and processes have been set up in many ways that exclude, you know, perhaps unintentionally. So it's really to try and think how, you know, the role that we have. Now, we're not just doing that for the sake of blethering, because, as Gordon said, our mission really is to provide this forum for community development practitioners. And part of what we hope to do is to, you know, sort of galvanise views, aspirations, possibilities, and to take that collective argument forward to argue for investment in, but not just investment. It's about using community development skills as they're intended to be used, not using them for silly, you know, surface, you know, caring, you know, looking after individuals' issues, but rather taking those individual issues and putting them into the public, you know, a broader context. So this is what we're hoping to do, is just kind of try and imagine how we can create a situation where community development is actually able to practice in a value-based way, and in a way that really brings communities into the heart of decision making. So does that sound all right to peeps? Any questions?
Yeah, me.
Go.
Yeah, because you brought up sort of like private matters, public issues, and that's a theme in terms of looking at our practice. And people are talking about how they're living their lives, but it's collectively. And I actually think to try and put some kind of positive thing about this, that actually following this pandemic, I think there's opportunities there, but it does take collective action. And I'm looking forward just to hearing some people's experience of what they have been doing at a local level. And it's hard and it's tough, but you sometimes need a tipping point in terms of people coming together and speaking out and really talking about it. I mean, one of the comments I heard from, it was an article I was reading this year, is that actually if it wasn't for people in communities pulling together, then, you know, it wasn't relying on the government officials and so on. So I think there are opportunities here that we should be maximising from a grassroots perspective to talk about. And I think there's that opportunity. May not feel like it right now, but I certainly think there is a basis to build on.
Cool. Anyone else, any questions, thoughts? I mean, Craig will get us all fired up, which will be smashing. I'm looking forward to his input very, very much. Everyone cool? Ready to get in and about the discussions once we go into workshops? Yeah? Cool. Okay.
Thanks, thanks
Mute.
Fiona. Thank you. Right, Craig, I've already done a wee bit of an introduction for you, but you can do more of that yourself. So the floor is now yours, sir.
I hate talking about myself.
Well,
thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for inviting me back. I was last year in 2019. Seeing some of you in person. Obviously the world has changed a little since then, but at least I don't need to get up so early to get to the conference. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll talk to you for a few minutes about some of my thoughts on local democracy and perhaps what Scotland could look like if we decided to call ourselves a normal country. You'll see what I mean by that in a minute. If I can get the slides working, there we go. So I talked a bit about this back in 2019 at the last conference. So some of you who were there will see some of these issues come up again, but I'm going to expand upon them and especially dive into some of the issues that we'll be talking about in the workshops later today. So how does Scotland's democracy, especially our local democracy, compare to our neighbours in Europe? How did we end up in the situation that we're in? Why is local democracy important? How can we change things? The history of Scotland's local democracy is, it's a long one. It goes back centuries. And it comes out of the medieval power structures and the feudal power structures of the 12th to the 18th centuries, especially with the things like the royal boroughs appearing and towns being given the ability to modify their own taxes and whatnot. These structures became formalised over the course of the 19th century. With county councils being set up, parish councils being set up, rationalisings taking place, which consolidated these structures and made them more uniform. This happened through the 20th century. You'll notice something. Each of these big changes happen on a timescale of about 30 to 50 years. We had one in the 70s, we had one in the 90s, or maybe due one now. So there's a conversation for the workshops. You'll also notice, though, that each of these consolidations and rationalisations and changes acted to centralise Scotland, removing accountability and responsibility from local areas. Scotland is now one of the most centralised countries in Europe. If you look at the size of the Highland Council, for instance, compared to a typical local council in Europe. Sorry, got some noise coming from someone there. Brilliant, thanks. Our local authorities are comparatively powerful, but they're nowhere near local enough. Below our local councils, we don't really have a consolidated structure at all. These local authorities would be called regional authorities in most of Europe. We do have community councils in some places, and in some places they work well. I'm certainly not disparaging the places that do have a well-functioning democratic community council. But in a lot of places they are dysfunctional. They're reliant on undemocratic nominations. Sometimes they're entirely absent. And even in areas with good community councils, the powers are limited and they're critically underfunded. The community council budget, annual budget, is in terms of hundreds of pounds, not thousands or tens of thousands or more. Our community councils are local enough, but they're nowhere near powerful enough. And this stands out as soon as you start to look at the lowest unit of local democracy in our neighbouring countries around Europe. Scotland is by far the standout example. Even England has more localised government than Scotland. But it's difficult to reform, especially in this digital age where a lot of things rely on interconnected IT systems. And anyone who is in government fears the phrase IT procurement contract. So wholesale reform of the current system is needed, but not easy. So a couple of years ago, we proposed a system that we called development councils that would try to restore some of that democracy to Scotland without having to do that very, very difficult and expensive reform. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm saying it's probably a much larger conversation to do that larger reform, but we can fix a lot of the problems now without having to do that. The model is based on the best aspects of community councils and development trusts. It's designed to bring power to local communities, designed to bring democracy to local communities, and it's designed to be representative. So that one of the big advantages of having more local democracy is more people can be involved in politics. More people can have their say, not just as a voter, but as an elected official. This map here is from a book we produced called the Atlas of Opportunity, and it imagines the boundaries of what these development councils could be across Scotland based on the average size of a typical European municipal council. They'd be part of a city, a whole town, several villages, maybe even just one hamlet. I've recently discovered that the smallest municipal council in Germany has a population of 7. I've no idea how their local elections work. I couldn't find out, I'm afraid. The development councils wouldn't necessarily have a set of powers automatically, but would be able to draw down powers from the regional authority. So anything that the regional authority controls, what we currently call our local authorities, could be drawn down by the development council, with the exception of maybe agreed reserve powers. They could be drawn down for a limited duration, say a specific project. They could be indefinite. Maybe a local community wants to take over running of its waste management. We've heard places, especially tourist towns, really want to have power over that. Maybe they want to take control over a municipal energy project. Civil servants at the regional authority would then report to the development council rather than the regional authority with regard to those drawn down powers, but otherwise all the other infrastructure would remain in place and wouldn't need much of that overhaul that would make things more difficult in a more wholesale reform. So that's the overview of the development councils. What I want to introduce now and give a bit of a provocation for the workshops is what this would look like in practice, just by reflecting what happens in one of our neighbouring countries in Europe into Scotland. Should say there's some more technicals in the development councils, forgot about this slide, around the elections, around how they would be managed by citizens' assemblies. I'll post a link to the paper in the chat if people want to read more about it. So last week I was in Germany. I was visiting my in-laws with my wife. And it turns out that my father-in-law lives in a place that's very similar to where we live. We live in a small village, close to a slightly larger town. I live in Kitry Hill, South Lanarkshire. My nearest town is Larkhall. So I have the population here is a few thousand. Larkhall is about 20,000. In Germany, my father-in-law lives in a wee village just in the outskirts of the town of Meckernich, which has a population of about 30,000. And I've shown here the structures of the public spending by government level in Scotland and in Germany for these areas. So in Scotland, the vast majority of public spending is carried out by either the UK government or the Scottish government. Now, I just want to say I don't want to make any presumptions about folks' feelings about Scottish independence at this conference, but one thing to perhaps consider, if that happens, and the result of that is a simple transfer of power of all the things that Westminster currently does, transferred straight to Holyrood, then that would mean something like 87% of public spending in Scotland being controlled by a single parliament. Those kind of things keep me up at night. South Lanarkshire, my local authority, controls about 14% of the spending that affects me. I don't have a community council in this village. So I have no level of local democracy beyond South Lanarkshire. Compare that to Germany. Look at how powerful the local municipal council is compared to the regional district council of Cologne. Never mind the state council or the federal government. Notice that the local democracy in Germany isn't just a subset or a drawdown from the regional government. It's not like they've taken a portion of Cologne's budget and they're spending it locally, which is the model that we're proposing in the Development Council as a first step. Overall spending across the board is much more evenly spread. In terms of numbers, the German Municipal Council spends approximately €2,000 per person per year, and the District Council about €1,100 a year. It's approximately £2,690 pounds per person per year across those two levels of government. Compare South Lanarkshire's spend per person per year of £2,410. Germany's federal structure also constitutionally mandates a much stronger sense of subsidiarity than Scotland's unitary structure. In Scotland, we've been talking, even I've been talking about devolving powers down from a higher level of government. In Germany, it's much more a case of subsidiarity, meaning that powers are held as locally as possible and are only pulled up when it is necessary to do so, or when a case is made to do so. When I was doing a bit of research for this, I also found out that the Cologne region has been recently praised for its relatively powerful participatory budget scheme. It's running similar lines to Scotland's own participatory budgeting, where citizens can propose projects and apply for funding to run them. In Germany, Cologne grants each of its 9 districts €100,000 per year for the scheme. This works out at about 20 cents per person per year. Compare that to South Lanarkshire's participatory budgeting scheme, which works out at about £17 per person per year. I'd really like to have a discussion in the workshops about the participatory budgeting and how that affects community development and where the flaws are in that, because I know participatory budgeting does have its own issues, and I'm certain there's going to be strong feelings about that. So a question for the workshop though, compare these two schemes. If Scotland's local government was stronger, if Scotland's local government was normal, would there be such a need for ad hoc participatory budgeting? Would there be a need for these ad hoc community development groups trying to eke out niches wherever they can, because basically the political structures don't exist otherwise? Or if we do have strong local government, would they need to engage more deeply with our community development in order to make sure that our elected officials are doing what we need them to do? So that's just an introduction to the Development Council idea. Again, I'll put a link to the paper in the chat. I'd love to get people asking questions about it. I would really stress that this is a reaction to a fundamentally broken system. It's trying to repair a broken system rather than to build a better system, build a system that the rest of Europe would call normal. If development councils become well established, there may be scope long-term to consider the role for regional authorities and for national government to get that more even spread of funding. There may be rationalizations of especially regional boundaries. You might, for instance, think of North and South Lanarkshire merging along the lines of the current Lanarkshire Health Board. Roles currently reserved to Holyrood and perhaps to Westminster could be revised and powers pulled down from those structures and given to more local areas. In future, I do stress I would like to see a subsidiarity model. I would like to see Scotland built on that model of subsidiarity, which presumes that all power is held at the most local level of government, unless and only while a case is made for a power to be pulled up to a regional authority, to a national authority, or perhaps to an international structure. That, however, will require that hard job of reorganising and perhaps bringing in that phrase of IT procurement contracts. So that's the talk. I would just like to throw a quick advert out. Common Weal's hiring at the moment. We've got 2 positions, and I'd love to put it out there to anyone at this conference or anyone you know who might be interested to come to work for us. Speak to me or Elaine if you want to know more about them. We've got a policy coordinator looking to help support our policy team, and we've got a networks coordinator which is looking to help develop our own community engagement, strengthen our own local activist groups, and to build connections between them and with partner organisations such as various community development groups around Scotland. So time's tight. If you want to apply, there's a link at the bottom of the slide there. Please come and join us if you fancy it. So thank you. I'm really excited to get into the workshops and hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Craig. And a wee plug at the end. I like that. 2 plugs at the end there. That's a book and a job if you're keen. So catch Craig at lunchtime if you're interested in either of those. Thank you very much for that. Fiona has outlined what the workshops are going to be about. Craig's posed another couple of questions for us, perhaps, for the workshop. So let's see if that can get crowbarred in. We've scheduled in on the programme for a kind of 10-ish minute break. Come back here for 11 o'clock and then into workshops. I'm looking at Meredith. It doesn't help. I really need to say it, don't I, Meredith? Meredith, can you just say again what people need to do to then join? I mean, some people will be very good at this, so apologies. This is probably more for my benefit than you guys, but when the folk come back from the break, will there be a link up there and they can just join the workshop they've been assigned, or?
Yep, exactly. So when people come back from the break at 11 o'clock, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms and you'll just go to the room that you're assigned in, and I'll post the link in the chat again so that whoever's going to be the note taker, they can start taking notes. All right.
So 10-15 minute break-ish. So if we can all be back for just before 11, that'd be great. Go and charge up your glass or go and have another fag, which is where I'm going. And I'll see you back here at 11. Thanks now. That puts our group in the middle of that. That's excellent. Group 6, who is it that's coming in?
It's me.
Hello, Katie.
Okay, so I'm going to attempt to capture what we talked about, because we talked about a lot.
Well, look, kind of 3 key points, wasn't it? Was it kind of one for each question? I'm helping you summarise here.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we're discussing really about how we as workers can make sure that we are empowering communities to ask relevant questions, challenge power dynamics, and hopefully include the discussions around what needs to be talked about with community at a kind of wider level. So I think that a lot of what we were saying was about local people feeling that if we are bringing conversations to the table, that they then are included in that. And Joy gave a really good example of how they've worked with groups who now just automatically expect to be included, and how do we get to that point where they are asking relevant questions and they know that they should be included in decision making locally, and going forward with that. I mean, that's very brief for what we actually talked about. And then the second question, how we might ensure that we're including the most marginalised communities. We discussed a little bit around, between rural and kind of city communities, and how a lot of this is about our capabilities as workers, and how a lot of this question fed into the first question around power dynamics, but also how we're overstretched. And as a sector, we are maybe overstretched, underfunded, under-resourced. So then it means that to do that, it just makes things, to do what we answered the first question, it makes things so much harder. So if we are able to be given more resources, more funding, but also it allows for workers to know that they can start a piece of work and see it through, and also that their funding doesn't get cut every year, or just, again, as we all know, the expectations on us to be doing kind of all things for all people. So I think that was quite a big thing, especially to do with the pandemic. I know last year we talked around that, to do with, as a sector, we were the the kind of ones that were filling the gap. And yeah, how do we highlight that we're doing that? Which then kind of fed on to the last question, because we were talking about how we collectivise and have our voices heard around what we're doing as a sector that needs to have a joined up approach. So it would be incredible if every area had a network, and every network then collectivised to then feed into policy and yeah, have it acknowledged that we are a skilled profession and that we are filling the gaps. Yeah, I mean, chime in, anyone, if you think that, Fiona, did I miss anything? Do you feel like I said it all?
That's great, well done.
I guess the only thing is that our kind of last point in the final question was about, you know, the need for us to highlight the role of community development across all of the policy arenas. I know that in the past CDAS has done that, and it's maybe time that we do that again, especially with a new sort of policies and programmes arriving. So maybe that's something that SCDN needs to take forward with CDAS.
Thank you very much, Katie. And group 6, using the kind of alphabetical order in numbers, group 5.
Thank you, that's me. Hopefully my group will agree with the bits I'm about to share with you. Let me just find the right one. So for the first question about what can we do as community development practitioners to ensure grassroots activism, we really spoke about making sure that we change the voices so that it's not always the same people involved in local decision making, and that there's a role for community development there in supporting people to actually meaningfully engage and supporting people to take roles of power. So making sure that voice of lived experience can be heard on boards and in places where we make decisions, but without also over responsibilizing people and making it feel like it's hard work for them. And that we've got a role for supporting the citizens' assemblies as well in supporting that wider voice to be heard. So hopefully the group agree that that kind of sums up what was really fascinating and wide-ranging discussions there. Our question 2 was about how might we ensure that the most marginalised communities are not left behind. Again, we had a really, really great discussion, and one of the things that was coming out was about avoiding that fragmentation. So how do we support groups not to be pitching against one another and actually combining to challenge those that hold power? And again, just that real value of lived experience and making it meaningful, and supporting people to actually work together and create the agenda for change and create the spaces for change within our communities. And the third question, I'm whistling through these really quickly because I'm aware we've got 4 other groups to get through as well, but our conversations were fabulous, and I just wish I could share back everything that we'd spoken about in the group. So the case for investment in communities in terms of community development, we actually had, again, another wide-ranging discussion, but the bit that came up was about never wasting a good crisis. How can we use the learning of this pandemic to actually challenge some of that structural inequality and the real poverty that's out in our communities? And again, how do we make sure that community development practitioners don't become the invisible bit in that, because the way that we work, we become invisible by supporting communities to go and do things, and it's really important to recognise the role of the animateur in that for the community development practitioner. And we also felt that there was a role for SCDN to actually support that network to make sure that practitioners are feeling supported, that they have more power behind them, to make sure that people, it can be quite lonely sometimes being the one that's been the voice of dissent and being that disruptor all the time. So there's a role for SCDN there to actually support the development of that network and to make sure that practitioners feel supported, because it can sometimes be quite difficult as well when you're challenging that maybe the person that pays your wages, that you're challenging to give up some of that power. So I'm really hoping my group feel that I've given justice to the conversations we had, and I will pass it on to the next group.
Thanks, Don. Group 4. Who's in group 4? Or who's feeding back from group 4? Oh, there's Colette. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks very much to everyone in group 4. We were able to capture lots and lots of information in the Jamboards, but I'll just give you a couple of points for each question. So question 1, grassroots activism. So we said about supporting local people to have their voices heard. Now, I know we've all heard that before, but really it's fundamentally what we have to keep harping on about is supporting people to have their voices heard, and that linked to the key points about valuing community development skills and community development processes. And so some of the people in our group said about the fact that it takes time. So empowerment of local people, it's a slow process. So it's about people understanding the process a bit more. We also talked about training and development for people who perhaps don't understand community development as well as people who are here today. So we talked about training for elected members and training for senior managers, just so that people really understand the process of community development a bit better and how it's needed in order to support communities. And that takes me nicely on to question 2 about marginalised communities. We spoke about community leaders being crucial, and again we spoke about how can we support people to develop their leadership skills at a local level. And we also spoke about highlighting examples of good practice. So we spoke about some partnerships that work well in, for example, the Possil area of Glasgow. So it's about potentially duplicating and replicating where it works best. So what works, identifying what works and duplicating it. And the whole thing about what works, we spoke a lot about analysing needs, so still the needs of communities, because if we don't know what the needs are within communities, then really we don't know what the starting point is. We also spoke about tapping into needs, so tapping into the needs of marginalised communities. So we spoke about different venues, different barriers to engagement. So we spoke about all those things, and we spoke about how in some respects people are hiding behind digital technology, because actually a lot of people want to get out there and want to see people face to face. So we questioned, why is it some people are only doing digital whereas others are getting out there? And I know obviously it's tricky, but we spoke about where digital technology doesn't suit everybody's needs. And then our last question about investing in communities, again, was about raising awareness of the skills and experiences of community development practitioners. It was about training, and it was about funding, and just really highlighting good practice in community development. I think that's it, Gordon, and as I say, we've captured lots on the Jamboards.
Thanks, Colette. It's group 3. That was the very small but perfectly formed group that I was in, led beautifully by Anne-Marie. But we've got somebody else feeding back. Neil agreed very quickly to do the feedback for us. Sorry, Neil, I know we twisted your arm a wee bit, but go for it.
Well, thanks very much, Gordon. I'd just like to open with an open invitation to Gordon's CLD Palace. If anybody wants to go, it's free tickets.
Steady now. That was a wee in joke there. I'm still not finished painting it. Still not finished painting.
So we had a rare old blether. Passions were running high. Even the dog get involved there, Anne Marie's wee dog. So that was great. And we covered such a vast range of topics. Anything from, you know, the good old days with the community flats to local plans and the community healthcare course. There was stuff on action partnerships, politics, tribalism, local democracy, having big campaigns. I must confess that I don't think that we necessarily captured all that passion on the Jamboard. So I think that's maybe a wee hand up there from us all. But I think you know, a lot of the points have been made, obviously. And one of the key things that I think we all agreed on was, you know, in the good old days, we had that army of local staff that, you know, were in their communities, working in their communities, you know, supporting local people, listening to the messages coming through and developing those ideas. You know, I see it in my town of Linlithgow, and I see it in other parts of Scotland through my work as well, and joining up with other communities, that there is this, you know, deficit, and it's just staring us in the face. How do we deal with it? There was a lot of discussion about lived experience, you know, actually pulling in the lived experience into, you know, new services, new initiatives, and yes, you know, accept the old chestnut about, you know, funding has to be long term and not just, you know, for projects that only last a few months or a year or two. Absolutely. But without that, you know, local democracy and the local empowerment, it's going to be very difficult for it to happen. We did discuss the, you know, the political scenario and, you know, how perhaps a national campaign, but also one that focuses on local councillors might work in the future, so that they, you know, appreciate more their role as a councillor representing the local community rather than necessarily the local authority. There was talk about the action partnerships. There was talk about some of the changes and reductions of local workers and local constituencies in certain areas over the recent past. So, you know, whilst there's that legacy, some of it's been more recent actually, and, you know, discussions about out of our work and so on and so forth. Is there anything else? I think, you know, that this idea that's come up in other groups about having some kind of concerted effort, some sort of national campaign, did I use that word? Maybe that is, you know, something we could look at in the future. I don't know if there's anything else that other people want to chip in with in the group. Was anything else?
Oh, I think that pretty much kind of covers it. Anne Marie, you okay with that? Were you coming in there, Anne Marie?
No, I was going to say, yeah, it's grand. And I just, you were saying as well about sharing the successes and the stuff, the good practices happened elsewhere, so people know that change can happen. So, because Neil gave some really good examples of that, and I think we need to share these stories. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne Marie.
Thanks, Neil. Group two then. We've only got two more to go and we're just about keeping to our time here, so no pressure. Group two. Who's doing that?
I'm just getting back from group two. We had
thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for everyone who was part of the group. I think we had a really good discussion, and I would thoroughly encourage you all to look at all of our various post-it notes, because there's only a few that are kind of we're talking about here. So under question 1 about grassroots activism, actually it chimed a lot with what Colette and group 4 were saying. So we were talking a bit about community capacity, but actually the idea that capacity building goes both ways, not just within the communities themselves, but also if those who are currently in power don't have the capacity to respond to that community, then no change happens. So kind of training and developing up as well. So that was kind of question 1. Question 2 about kind of ensuring that marginalised groups are not left behind. We were talking about the kind of dedicated support that community development workers can offer, and specifically using the existing expertise and the kind of proactive approach of community development workers to enable marginalised groups to actually access the services that currently exist, but are maybe they're just not as visible as they could be, and particularly that the importance of those services taking place at a neighbourhood level. And I think that maybe comes back to what Craig was talking about in the kind of the plenary earlier. And then finally, the third question about making that case for investment. I think it's come up a couple of times already, talking about the good examples of when things succeeded, but actually we also focused on emphasising the risks of what happens if you don't invest in community development, and again showing that kind of other side of the coin. and kind of again similar to what someone else has said around building on the kind of the things which we've been able to positively take out of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, that community development is a tangible way of responding to the kind of urgent needs in our communities, and kind of holding those up as success stories. So yeah, happy for anyone else from my group to chip in, but that's what we kind of captured to share back.
Thanks, Katrina. Anyone else from group 2 wants to chip in? Are we okay for group 1? Group 1, who's on?
So I've been nominated.
Well done, David, but you're the last one in, so you can't actually say, yes, we've covered all of that already. Sorry, David, on you go.
So I'm going to start at the back. The third question, how can we put together a case for investment? We had a fantastic group and bubbling with ideas of experienced practitioners. We believe that SCDN should invite the minister to come and listen to practitioners' ideas on ways to reimagine the role of community councils and the local democracy, which they've been talking about for ages. And SCDN really needs to go and speak to the civil servants who are helping to frame the next iteration of the third tier of local democracy. And so get in there, please. That's what we were all thinking. That was the most important thing that I think came out of our session. And then in the previous one, question 2, how can we ensure that the most marginalized communities are not left behind? We actually questioned whether it was valid, whether it was sensible to only focus on the deadbeat communities and to actually try and look slightly bigger. And is there a way of stopping this market deciding everything and try and plan something so that maybe the better off communities next to the poorer communities or the disadvantaged communities can collaborate in some way? So it's a bit countercultural, but get away from pigeonholing, because the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation is pretty crude measure, not always very good. And then the first question was really to all of us to work on ways of improving the community planning process. It's a big ask. So that
I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow, if we can sort that this afternoon, though, David. So just take the rest of the week off then, if we can fix that. Thanks.
That's us.
David, thank you very much. Now, we're slightly ahead of time. We've got 5 minutes. We've got the next part is the kind of blether with the board bit. Now, a couple of issues have come up through some of the feedback suggesting that SCDN that we should be looking at a few things. So if you guys are able to come to stay on with us, and we can try and tease some of those out a wee bit further later on after or during lunch, in fact, you bring your sandwich into the room, that would be terrific. We will gather all, I'm looking at Meredith and Susan here. We will be able to gather all the Jamboard things. Yes, that's a nod there from
Yes.
right. So we will, and I've scribbled some notes, and I could see others scribbling some notes. So we will be able to get some level of kind of detail from some of the discussions that folk were having in the groups. I hope you enjoyed the discussion groups, because I think part of these kind of events only really start coming alive when you can get into the small groups and start discussing things, don't they? You know, so let me start to finish by thanking everyone for coming along in case you run away. So Craig, thank you. Thank you to Meredith. You're not running away. I'll thank you later. Thanks to the facilitators as well for doing their stuff. And I don't think the subgroup that helped doing the planning are going to run away, but they might. So the planning subgroup, thank you very much for that as well. And as always, thank you, Susan Campbell, for keeping us right. Yeah, above and beyond as usual. But I'll do more thanks later on, you know. But let's give them all a wee hand just now, will we? Just say thank you very much. And you guys, thank you very much for turning up.